thinking about selling my business, but this seems like it's going to be an incredibly painful exercise. How does this actually work? That's a question we hear many times every week. We wanted to make this two-part series to address some of the more common and frequently asked questions that come up in contemplating whether someone should sell a business, or oftentimes a lot of the same questions if we're looking to seek capital. But this is part 2, selling a business, solving for pain points. I'm Arthur Petropoulos, managing partner here at Hillview Partners. We're a middle market, lower middle market investment banking firm, M&A, capital advisory firm, helping companies sell businesses, helping companies find capital. Typically, companies generating about $1 to $10 million in pre-tax earnings or EBITDA, both nationally, internationally, everything in between. And so we went through questions 1 through 5 in the earlier video from this week. We're going to go through questions 6 through 10 today. And so a sixth question that often comes up when someone is contemplating if they're going to sell their business is, what happens to my employees? Is it just random? Is it just arbitrary? And the answer to that is, it can be, but it can't be. And what we mean by this is, when we go out to a market to sell a business, it's a candid dialogue between the person interested in buying and us. And they say, what is the seller's intention? What are their desires relative to the other employees of the business? And that's our opportunity to really kind of create structure, to create what we would like to see in this situation, to see just how close we can get there. So as we've said in other videos in the past, let's paint the objectives and then work backwards from there, but it doesn't have to be random. And question 7 kind of builds off of this, is the idea of, well, what happens to me? And we made, and we'll put a thumbnail here, an entire video of what happens to me when I sell my business. But the thing is, it happens according to how it is agreed to happen. And that's the tricky thing. When someone doesn't sell businesses every day, they don't know what things can be agreed upon prior to the selling of a business. They don't know what things can be structured, what things can be planned for. But a sale of a business is a contractual thing that happens. Someone is going to buy some stuff, someone is going to sell some stuff, right? In a very simple sense. But what happens to employees? What happens to the ownership? What does a transition for ownership look like? What obligations, duties are there after the transaction, as part of the transaction? These are all things that can be negotiated. These are all things that can be structured. And what you can ask for, and what's market, what's acceptable, these are all things that can be discussed and can be agreed upon. And so what happens to me, what happens to the seller after the transaction, well, that's something we can make crystal clear. We want to make crystal clear in every situation so there's no doubt or wonder or concern as to how random something is going to be. The goal of the process of selling a business and utilizing a firm like ours is not purely just to get top dollar on it, but is to get a knowable, defined, certain future for the sellers of the business. And so that pertains to, we talked in the last video about value. We're going to talk about our next point is structure. Then what happens to transition of ownership, which we talked about. What happens to stakeholders or employees as well. A good process removes or eliminates doubt, removes wonder, removes concern. We mean wonder in the most negative sense possible, removes worry. Question number 8 that often comes up is, okay, someone's going to buy the company for X dollars, but do I get all of that at closing, or when do I get the money? And the answer is sometimes, and it is negotiable. And so the purchase price of a business is one variable, but the structure, as we've talked about in many of our videos, is another key variable of a transaction. So if you're selling your business and you are selling it for X dollars, you say, well, how much is that closing? How much is over time? Of the components that are over time, how much of that is predicated on anything happening besides time elapsing, right? Does revenues, are there earnouts, are there targets, are there catalysts or contingencies? These are all things that need to get negotiated. So the answer to what happens in terms of the payment of the consideration, it is again something that you do not want to leave up to chance. You want it to be etched in stone. This is precisely how it's going to happen. If there's any risk for any post-transaction consideration, we want that to be clearly defined and agreed upon. Now, question 9, again, is now that we're seeing all these different things that have to happen, all of these considerations and variables that need to be contemplated, protected, and advocated on behalf of, who coordinates all of this? And the answer is your trusty investment banker. Us, people like our firm. We do this all day, every day. If you ask me to chew gum and tie my shoes, I will fail. But if you say, hey, Arthur, how do you and your firm sell a business? We will walk through that in painful detail because we've iterated this hundreds of times, and this is what we do. And we coordinate the entirety of this, from the receiving and the coordination of the materials and information on the front end, to preparing the materials, to crafting the narrative, to doing the research for the counterparties, to reaching out to the counterparties, to building the audience up, to chiseling it to offers, to negotiating the offers across all variables, and then finding that LOI, finding the right party to enter into, and then ushering through the confirmatory diligence, through the definitive documentation to the closing. You'd say, wow, that's a lot of steps. And the answer is, yes, it is. However, when you've done this over and over and over again, it becomes machine-like, lockstep, You know when things are going right. You know when things are not going right. You know when things need to be pushed in the right direction. You know when things need to be allowed to kind of take their course. And so the point is, ask me to bake a loaf of bread and I cannot do it for you. However, ask us if we can sell a business and if we know all the steps and can coordinate it like a Sherpa walking up Mount Everest. We absolutely can, and that's our business. And again, we're not just selling our own book here. Whatever advisor you use, whatever investment banker you use, these are the things you want to look for. But when you say who's coordinating all of this, who is bringing this from concept and ideation through actually a closing, it should be your banker. That is their job. That's what you pay them for. And the final question, and one that is paramount to the totality of all of these considerations, beyond oftentimes even purely just what's the price, what's the structure, what's the process, how do we facilitate all of this, is can this be done quietly? And again, the answer is, as you've seen the motif for both of these videos, depends who you work with. Now, there are firms out, they're going to put your company up on a mailing list and they're going to blast it out to 10,000 people. And they're going to say, there's a Southeast disaster remediation company that works in these types of buildings in these particular states. Now, sometimes they'll have the names out there, even sometimes they won't put the names out there, but is it that hard to back into? A specialty manufacturer of magnetic seals for boats that is headquartered in the Northeast and sells to large defense companies, software company that does this thing in this place for these customers, right? It doesn't take geniuses, and there are geniuses, let's call it, on the other side of the table trying to reverse engineer all these things. So discretion, doing things quietly, not letting customers know what's going on, not letting employees know what's going on sometimes, not letting competitors certainly know what's going on. These are pain points that need to be mitigated. These are issues that should never arise, that need to be avoided at all costs. And it takes a certain process, and it takes a certain approach to accomplish this. It's not easy, but you need things to be effective, expeditious. You need to have the conversations directly with the people that could be interested in the company, but you need to be quiet to the rest of the world. The first time you want someone to know that a company might be for sale is when it gets announced to the public. And people say, I can't believe we didn't know that this company was being sold the whole time. But the transition's in place. The wheel keeps moving. The important people that need to know about it prior to the closing do know about it, so that disruption comes down. Now, this is a place, and this is an area of deals that people will mess up incredibly badly, and everyone in the world will know a particular company is for sale before there's any results, and it can even negatively impact the results because it starts to disrupt things before the closing. Everybody gets rattled. So there's an optimal timing for when these things should be disclosed. There's an optimal timing for how these things need to be handled. It needs to be done quietly. It needs to be done discreetly. It needs to be done intelligently. And so let's recap the second 5 pain points that one should be thinking about when selling a company and how we mitigate them. So first is, what happens to my employees? The answer, what we negotiate to happen to the employees. What happens to, question 7, me as the seller? Again, what we negotiate to take place and what we agree upon and what we delineate, what we clearly define in the documentation between the buyer and the seller. Now, question 8, do I get my money at closing? Well, some portion of it, yes. Ideally, as much of it as possible. And whatever's post-transaction, again, is a product of contract, a product of agreement, a product of negotiation. And you have to know what you can ask for, what you can't ask for, what's market, what's not market, how aggressive can we be, when should we walk, when should we push, right? That's what someone like us brings to the table. And to that point, question number 9, who coordinates all of this? A competent investment banker, an investment banking firm that does this every single day. And again, focus more. Sometimes we get caught up on, well, I need to have someone that's done 150 companies that manufacture ice cream in Texas. But in reality, it's got to be a company that understands your size, your complexion, your objectives, who the counterparties are, because a lot of these processes work similarly for particular sizes or stratifications of companies, more so than it's more industry specific. So different things to contemplate. Question 10 is, can we do this quietly? Can we make ranting YouTube videos every week quietly? Probably not. However, can we sell a business quietly, discreetly, so the whole world doesn't know anything's going on until it's actually done? Absolutely. Again, very heavily dependent on the party you work with. And so that's the thought for today. And again, I think we'll leave it on the same note of, is this something we should explore as a company? And again, we would strongly suggest, do it when you can, do it when you want to, not when you have to, not when you're forced to. The ultimate leverage in business is the ability to not have to do something. And so you should contemplate, if you are thinking about selling a business in the future, think about doing it now. Get the data points now. Figure out what the market would value things at now. See what a third party would pay for the company now. And that way, if there's an optimal path, that you want to heavily negotiate to optimize the terms for yourself, better to do that now when you don't have to. Because trust me, when it comes time to sell a business and the answer is, well, I have to sell, well, I need to sell, well, it has to be done by this time, that is when the leverage starts to work against you. So just our thoughts, just our experience. And as always, we're always happy to chat with anyone interested in potentially exiting the business at any point now or in the future. But that's the thought for today. I hope the week's finishing up well for everyone. Keep pushing forward. God bless. See you next time.